I said it's a real pleasure to be here with you today. And today what I'm going to talk about is our long-term farming systems trial. This is now in its 43rd year, and it is the longest running side-by-side comparison of organic and conventional grain cropping methods in North America. And I'm going to pull out of it what I think are important agroecological principles that may be important to you. The story of the farming systems trial, though, while it started in 1981, really starts back in 1939 in a meeting in Cheshire, England. A group of doctors and professors and educated people in England met there to discuss the poor health of the British population. I think this is relevant today because as we look around, especially in the United States and other developed countries, we see, for instance, in the United States, 50% of all of our entire population has some chronic disease, some non-communicable disease that could be solved through lifestyle changes such as exercise and food. And the two speakers there were Sir Albert Howard and Sir Robert McCarrison. Robert McCarrison was a doctor, and he oversaw the health department of India at the time. And he also had done numerous studies with mice and pigeons and other animals looking at how food as medicine was really what he was doing. And he says here, "I know of nothing so potent in maintaining good health as perfectly constituted food. I know nothing so potent in producing ill health as improperly constituted food." And one thing that he noticed was there was groups in India that had tremendous health and other groups that had poor health. And he could attribute that very much to their diet and the way they grew their food. Sir Albert Howard was a British scientist who was an agronomist, and he had come to Indore, India, where there was a research station. And what he noticed quickly was that the farmers in the region were recycling all of their waste from their animals and plant material, and they were making what we now call compost. He called it the indoor process. And he started testing compost and comparing it to what he called artificial manures at the time, but what we would now know as synthetic soluble-based fertilizers. And through his work, he really could see that use of natural fertilizers like compost boosted the health of the soil and also boosted that, which resulted in plant health, and his hypothesis was it would also lead to human health. So this conversation started, and at the end of this meeting, everyone agreed there needed to be more research conducted on this link between soil health and human health. And then we get to Lady Balfour, because no one took up that challenge except for Eve Balfour. She inherited her parents' farm, her and her sister, and in deciding what they would do with the farm, they decided to create a natural experiment where they broke the farm into three different systems. A natural closed system, meaning that everything for fertility and pest management came from within the farm, no purchase inputs from outside. Everything was recycled. A chemical system, which was becoming more and more the standard system of the day, and then a mixed system where they used an approach of natural fertility as well as chemical fertility. And this went on for 30 years and had tremendous results and demonstrated that the natural closed system and the mixed system produce soil health, produced adequate amounts of food. There was a lot of research that was done. However, many scientists that were naysayers at the time basically said that it wasn't considered scientifically valid because it didn't have randomized or replicated plots. It was just three distinct parts of the farm. And somebody during this time was paying attention, and as a matter of fact, he was writing back and forth to Sir Albert Howard and Lady Balfour And this was J.I. Rodale, the founder of the Rodale Institute. And he wasn't a farmer. He manufactured switches. As a matter of fact, their company, Lutron Technologies, is still in existence in the Allentown or Lehigh Valley region where we reside today. But in his inquiries and his writings, he started something called Organic Gardening and Farming Magazine, which is where we get the term organic, which is what, at least in the English language, used for that term organic, like the National Organic Program or organic food. That's where that came from. And in 1947, he founded the Rodale Institute. And he said at that time, healthy soil equals healthy food equals healthy people. And for the last 70 years or so, we've been on this journey to understand how food production, how we manage the soil, and how we produce food ultimately is linked to human health. And what J.I. Rodale said was how you treat the soil and how you treat the earth and the environment is really a direct reflection of how you treat other people and how you think about other people. And his son, Bob Rodale, who was a serious businessman, really expanded the operations of their press, and it became a very successful press. And he was a champion of the organic movement. But when he went to Washington, D.C. to ask the United States government for a program of organic farming, they said, we don't have any research. We have nothing documented to say that organic farming is a viable method of farming. And using largely the subscription base of Organic Gardening Magazine, the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, reached out to farmers across the country and found that actually organic farming is a viable method of farming that many farmers were doing on a large scale, not just backyard gardening or not on small scales. And this report was published in 1980. So in 1981, Bob Rodale started what is now called the Farming Systems Trial. He bought a piece of land right next to the Rodale Institute that had been managed conventionally with heavy tillage and heavy chemical use for probably 30 years, maybe more like 70 years, and began to put into place a randomized replicated trial that really scientists could not poke holes in scientifically, since it was designed correctly. I mean, it now has 8 different farming systems that are being tested side by side, and I'll explain those. The 3 main systems that started, or really still the main systems, but the first systems that were started was what we call an organic manure. And this is very similar to Lady Balfour's Hawley experiment, where we had a closed system. So this is a farm that has livestock. It has livestock manure to be able to be recycled. And every 4 years, we apply composted dairy manure back on these fields. It's a more diverse crop rotation with 4 grain crops, followed by 3 years of a forage, in this case, an alfalfa orchard grass mix. The organic legume system was intended to see whether or not we could get enough nitrogen and fertility from a complete plant-based fertility program. So the organic legume system only uses leguminous plant material like vetch and clover, and pretty much vetch and clover are the main sources of fertility, as well as rye as a cover crop. And this system has never received any fertilizer or any compost or any extra fertility other than plants in the 43 history of the Farming Systems Trial. And then the conventional synthetic system is one that follows the typical or standard practices of reflecting mostly the United States. It reflects about 70% of the agriculture in the United States. And all of the recommendations come from our university, our state university, And it's the same recommendations that they're providing to farmers that are growing crops throughout the state of Pennsylvania. In 2008, we recognized that no-till, producing without tilling the soil, was becoming popular, especially with the beginning of GMO crops that could tolerate herbicides. It was growing and expanding around the country and the globe. And therefore, in 2008, we added a no-till system in all of these three systems. So that means we now have 6 different farming systems. And the conventional is achieved, the conventional no-till was achieved by using herbicides. But the conventional, the no-till organic is achieved through something that we've been working on, and it continues to be a high priority of our work and research at Rodale Institute. And that's the use of what we call cover crop-based organic no-till, where we plant a winter annual crop. In this case, we have hairy vetch planted. And then we roll it and crimp it with what we call a roller crimper, which is mounted in this case on the front of the tractor. And that roller crimper is filled with water. So the weight of the implement is crimping and killing the cover crop. And then behind that is the planter. And in this case, we've set it up so that we can make one pass over the field. This provides a tremendous benefit, especially in organic agriculture, where we have demonstrated that we can achieve yields or production equal to a conventional system. But it requires extensive weed management, usually with tillage and cultivation, that can have an impact on soil health, as well as we're emitting greenhouse gases when we're driving tractors over the field. And it also is an increase of labor. So there are many benefits to this system, including what we think soil health and soil carbon sequestration. So to take a look at soil organic matter in the farming systems trial, we have always been taking measurements down to 20 centimeters, so 0 to 20 centimeter depths. And more recently, we started using a Giddings probe and taking measurements down to 1 meter depth or 100 centimeter depth. And when we do that, we clearly can see that the top soil layer in the organic is deeper than the conventional. That was something that was visually obvious as we started this. So we're now digging deeper than just that 20 centimeter depth. But one thing you can recognize here is that in the organic systems, there was an increase in organic matter very quickly. And that started to even out over time, which is something that we expect where we see something called soil carbon saturation. But our more recent studies and some things we're looking at suggest that this is continuing to increase, but at a slower rate. And one of our, and as we've dug deeper, what we found is as we start to dig deeper below that 20 centimeter depth, is that especially in the organic systems, we start to see greater levels of carbon, greater amounts of carbon that maybe haven't been looked at before. And what the other thing to recognize is that the majority of studies that are demonstrating changes in soil carbon, soil organic matter, have usually been done at a much lower surface depth. And we think that if we start to look deeper at 1 meter, maybe even 2 meters in some cases in different soils, we're going to start to see a tremendous benefit of regenerative and organic practices. But here, what we're showing is we have soil organic carbon. POC is something we call active carbon. This is the carbon that is readily available to microbes as plant material breaks down or carbon material breaks down. MBC is microbial biomass carbon, so it's the amount of carbon that is locked up in the microbes in the soil. And WEOC is water extractable organic carbon. So the amount of the carbon that can be dissolved in water and potentially move down deeper in the soil profile. And in almost all cases, as we go deeper in the soil, we start to see a tremendous difference, especially in the organic systems and especially in the organic manure system. So soil carbon is higher at deeper depths in the organic systems. And one of the first studies that took a real hard look at this and was published in the journal Nature looked at the first 15 years in the farming systems trial. And so what this is showing is in the manure and legume systems, in that 15-year period, there was a significant increase in soil carbon. In the conventional system, there was no change. And if I move over to this panel to the right and explain this a little bit, I think this is also important to understand. This is the nitrogen inputs. So the total amount of nitrogen from fertilizer, manure, or in the case of the legume, plant-based fertility. So the total amount of nitrogen that goes into the system. The exports is the amount of nitrogen that's taken away from the system through harvest. And the surplus N, or C, is the amount of nitrogen that's remaining. And so that's nitrogen that could be potentially lost to the environment as off-gassing into the air or leaching into the soil. And what you see is that in the manure system, there's been a tremendous accumulation of nitrogen in the soil. So that system is holding on to the nitrogen in the soil. In the conventional system, there's been actually a loss of nitrogen, a significant loss of nitrogen over time, and that must have gone into the environment. And I will show where some data in a couple slides where we can see where that nitrogen has gone. But when we look at the carbon accumulation in the soil, this represents 3.12 metric tons of carbon per hectare per year. And I just did some math that if we were to, globally move towards an organic or regenerative organic system in all of the cropland across the globe, we could achieve somewhere close to 8% of the global annual greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted every year and sequester that back to the soil. So as we think about agroecological practices and principles, the one and soil health and the resilience of the system, we've started to think about the water quality or the physical structure of the soil and how that impacts water and water retention. And here's just something that we tend to notice. This is we went out to the field at exactly the same time when there was a heavy rain, and these fields are right next to each other, planted to wheat. One's organic and one's conventional. And we just noticed that it looks like the soil is infiltrating faster into the organic, while in the conventional, it's pooling and leaving that soil more prone to erosion. So more recently, as I mentioned, we've started to take measurements to understand this better. And these are recent, this is recent data that we've just analyzed or published. And the left panel or the left graph is compaction. And this is the depth of the soil down to 300 PSI. So when we put a soil penetrometer into the ground, when it reaches 300 PSI, we measure that depth. And the reason we chose 300 PSI is that that's the pressure where it becomes virtually impossible or very difficult for roots to penetrate the soil. It's the compaction layer. And what we found is that the compaction layer was deeper in the organic systems, meaning that the roots are able to penetrate further, and probably water, when it rains, is able to go further into the soil profile. In the reduced tillage in the conventional, the no-till actually had the most compact soil And in the organic systems, there was no impact of tillage on the compaction. We've also measured water infiltration, and this is using a double ring infiltrator. So it's basically mimicking a saturated soil and then measuring the rate of water infiltration into the soil in the center of the ring. So this is the speed at which water can enter the soil, which is important because if water is not going in, it's running off and it leaves prone to erosion. It also means that we're not capturing that water when it's raining. And so if we have periods of drought, but we didn't capture the water during a period of rain or precipitation, then we're losing that water. And so again, it's showing similar results that the infiltration rates are higher in both of the organic systems. So the organic system had 40 to 87% less soil compaction and 25 to 218% higher water infiltration rate. So more water is going in to the soil. And this can have profound effects. So this was a study that was published a while ago, but it looked at a period of about 10 years or 12 years where there was I think there's 6 periods of drought. 6 periods of drought or low rainfall. And every year that we have low rainfall years, the organic system outperforms the conventional system. And that's what this is showing, that in 5 out of the 6 years, the organic systems out yielded, I believe this is corn or maize, out yielded the conventional system. And in 1 year, it was an extreme drought. And while there was still low yields, the yield of the organic systems was tremendously higher. And one thing to consider, we know that approximately 1% increase in soil organic matter is equal to 25,000 gallons of water per acre. And in the organic system, we have on average about 2% higher organic matter in the organic systems to the conventional systems. So that increase in organic matter can hold on to more moisture and make that available to the plant later in the season. And that's critical as we consider climate change and periods of increased heat and lack of rainfall. The other thing we have in the farming systems trial is what we call a lysimeter. So this is a water catchment device where when it rains, all of the water that's in a cylinder about 1 meter below the soil is captured, and then it's collected in a carboy or a container that's buried under the soil. And then we can pump that out and test that water. So this graph on the left is from the Nature article that I mentioned earlier and showed that there was a loss of nitrogen in the conventional system. And you can see that here. This is accumulated nitrates tested from the lysimeters over time, over a 5-year period. And you can see that on the top, this is the conventional, this is the water collected under the conventional is the top line, and the other 2 lines are the water collected under the organic system. So there's more nitrogen leaching potentially into groundwater from the conventional system. And we're also testing for chemicals, and we routinely find chemicals like atrazine and metallochlor that are actually banned in a lot of other countries, but not banned in the United States, that could have significant health impacts on humans. And this is important. So this is a map of the United States and the nitrogen balance. So what we're basically seeing is in the major crop producing areas of the United States, we have massive nitrogen loading. So the amount of nitrogen use that can't be stored in the soil and is lost to the environment. A lot of this goes into wells. We actually have warnings in the United States in some of these communities that women who are pregnant should not drink the water because of certain complications that they will have with high nitrogen levels. And a lot of this gets into our rivers and streams and has caused eutrophication in the Gulf of Mexico as it runs out into the ocean. Again, reducing the ability for us to feed, while we're trying to grow food to feed people, to keep them healthy, we're actually destroying aquatic environments and actually diminishing the amount of food that could be harvested from those environments. And a lot of the production in these areas is actually being used for things like ethanol or exported out of the country or used for animal feed. So it's not all being directly, or very little of it is being actually used for human consumption. We also did a review of energy and greenhouse gas emissions. And so what this is showing is, and this was reported in our 30-year report. So this was before we had the no-till treatments. But the energy inputs were 37% higher in the conventional system. And what really made the difference was the energy used to produce the mineral fertilizers, to produce it and to transport the mineral fertilizers. Diesel fuel in the organic was a little bit higher, which we expected because of multiple passes over the field to control weeds. But what really tipped the scale was the manufacturing of mineral soluble based fertilizers. And then greenhouse gas emissions were 60% higher in the conventional system. And that came from two things. One was the production, the greenhouse gases that occurred from the production of the mineral fertilizer, and then nitrous oxide emissions from the soil, largely because of the use of nitrogen fertilizer like urea or ammonium nitrate. So again, we're losing that nitrogen to the soil and potentially leaching into groundwater, and we're also losing it to the atmosphere through the conventional practices. And then I want to move a little bit to the economics, because that's an important part. Farmers, this might be great, but if farmers don't want to adopt it, then how do we, move the needle and get more farmers to practice organic agriculture? And this was in 2016. We had our highest corn yields in the farming systems trial in the organic system at that year. The price for conventional corn that year was $3.50 US dollars, and the price for organic corn was $9.50 US dollars. And so I put here the difference in total revenue, and this is almost 4 times the revenue generated for an organic farmer than the conventional farmer. And these yields here for the conventional were right at the average for our county, our local average. So we did everything right. We had what we think to be good yields, but 2016 again was a low rainfall year, and for that reason we think the organic system outperformed the conventional system. And so we did a deeper dive, a more scientifically driven economic analysis. It was an enterprise budget analysis where each plot or each system was basically modeled as a 54-hectare farm, and because of the way the trial was designed, we're growing 3 crops every single year in every single system. So it might be similar to a farm that is growing 3 different crops, but in a crop rotation. So here I'm showing the costs Our previous economic analysis had the costs higher in the organic system. But again, this is 2020, so it was before, this goes from 2008 to 2020, a 12-year period. But it was before even the more recent increase in fertilizers that's occurred over the last year to 2 years due to the pandemic and potentially the war in Ukraine. But you can see over that 12-year period, the expenses in the conventional were higher than in the organic systems. And in the conventional and the legume, it is important to notice that the reducing the tillage did actually result in reduced costs. These are the yields. And so during that 12-year period, we had equal corn yields between the conventional system and the organic manure system. We had equal wheat yields between the conventional system and the organic manure system, but the soybean yields were lower. And we attribute that to competition from weeds. And weed management is a major priority for the Rodale Institute. So we think that over time and with more research and technology, a lot of technology that we see coming, such as robotics and the ability to have improved non-chemical weed management strategies, should increase soybeans to be equal to the conventional system, as well as crop breeding of varieties for an ecological based system like organic. But this is important when we think about a land sharing or a land sparing argument, because we're demonstrating that we can produce crops and have production that's equal to the conventional methods or the standard methods with organic practices. Of course, the revenues in just about every single economic study of organic systems, we find that the organic system is more profitable. And this largely comes from increased price premiums for organic products, which is, again, not only great for the farmer, who often are struggling financially, but it can also be great for, if you look at it from an entire country or an entire region, to have more farmers become organic. It keeps more of that money within the community. It can be a really important economic driver in that community. But what's important to point out is that if we take away the price premiums, the gross revenues for the organic manure, the more diversified organic manure system, are equal to the conventional system without the price premiums. And overall, we look at total net returns, or the gross revenues minus the costs. We see that even without organic premiums, the diversified organic manure system is more profitable than the conventional system. And if you think about this as a farm, because this is a 54-hectare farm, and this is what the net returns are returned to management. This farm, the diversified manure system, is making over $50,000 per year. So that's an amount of money that a family could live on and pay themselves. The conventional system is making about $5,000 to $10,000 on that 54-hectare farm, and that is not enough to sustain a family. And that's why we see agriculture getting so much bigger, because a farmer can't just grow 54 hectares. They need 300, 400, 500 hectares in order to be, really produce or have enough income to support themselves and their family. And I just show this because, again, this is just about every single economic study that you look at. This is actually farmers. This is data reported by farmers in the United States, and the only in the conventional system, only corn production was profitable. Farmers actually lost money or losing money on wheat and soybean production, while in the organic system, we see profit in all the systems. And that's what's happening, and what's driving our choices by the farmers is that we see more and more production of corn and less diversity on the farm. And there's a lot of different there's consequences for that. We actually think there's consequences that extend to our health, because we have a lot of things like high fructose corn syrup in a lot of products, basically because we have so much corn produced in the United States and around the world. But farmers that are growing organically can be profitable with a more diverse crop rotation. And there's ecological benefits of having a more diverse crop rotation. And just briefly, I'll mention some of our current work, and that is looking at the nutritional quality or the nutritional density of the food we eat. Because we've recognized that over the last 70 years, during the expanse or increase of industrial agriculture, we found a decrease in the nutritional quality of our food. This is protein levels of the major grains grown around the world. So in addition to a decline in protein, we also see a decline in important essential amino acids. And we've also see a pretty clear indication that we have an increase in carbohydrates and starch in most of our grains. So in the United States, it's estimated that 75% of the population is overweight and has some sort of metabolic disorder. And we're just asking the question, is it possible because the food we're eating has so much more carbohydrates and starch, but less nutrients that our bodies actually need, like proteins and amino acids? So we're starting to test our grains and other crops in the farming systems trial, as well as a new vegetable systems trial specifically intended to measure the nutritional density of food that's produced. And in this slide, we looked at that same 12-year period at different nutrients of the grains, and you see there's 4 different grains represented. But what I think is important here is to show that in many cases, management might be affecting the nutrients. And I put here these amino acids: threonine, valine, isoleucine, leucine, phenylalanine, and histidine, were all influenced by management in some way, meaning that if we compare them to maybe the organic manure compared to the organic legume, we see differences in the exact same variety. One thing that makes it difficult is that the corn or the maize and the soybeans in the conventional system are all GMO or genetically modified, so they're not the exact same varieties in the that compared to the organic. So that confounds and makes it a little bit difficult. But what we're seeing over a 12-year period, we're seeing higher protein and higher B vitamins in the organic systems. And we're really asking the question now is, we don't have the expertise, but what does that mean for human health? So that's where we are. I hope that that gave a little bit a glimpse of some of the agroecological principles from organic farming, and look forward to questions.